Welcome to the Higher Ed Demand Gen podcast, helping higher education marketing leaders share knowledge about learning, strategies, and tactics that are relevant today. See what you can learn today by listening to one of our episodes.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Higher Ed Demand Gen podcast, hosted by Concept 3D. On this podcast, we discuss marketing topics on creating and capturing demand in higher ed. So before we jump in, we do have a quick message from our sponsors, which is Concept 3D. Concept 3D's purpose is to foster connections through technology, elevating the way businesses connect with their community by leveraging the power of events and location. If your school needs an updated interactive map, virtual tour, or centralized events calendar, please reach out to concept3d.com. Thanks. Okay, so I'll start with a quick introduction of myself. My name is Shiro, and I will be your host today for the podcast. And today I'm very, very excited to introduce our guest speaker. I've actually been trying to reach out to him probably for almost close to a year, so it's a big milestone for myself. He is a leader in higher education, enrollment management, and marketing, and he's currently serving as the head of marketing at EdSights. Please welcome Gil Rogers.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here. And Shiro, I'm excited that there's two varies in that level of excitement. So hopefully we can live up to the hype today.
Yep. From an analytics perspective, that's 2x, you know?
That's it.
Cool. And I like to start off with an icebreaker, which is a very loaded blanket question, but what do you love about higher ed?
What's not to love, right? No, I think in all sincerity, I think higher education is a opportunity creator for so many people. And one of the reasons why I've been in higher education my entire career has been to connect students with those opportunities. And more importantly now, especially in light of recent trends with, demographic shifts, as well as, post-COVID isolation challenges and financial markets and all these other things, there's so much opportunity to refine how we support student success. And so I think, I'm in higher education and have stayed in higher education because of the desire to help to make those opportunities available and successful and fruitful for the students who decide to pursue them. I've got two kids, a 9-year-old. Oh, she's 10 now. Ugh. I've got a 10-year-old and a 7, almost 8-year-old. And I think back to a couple years ago when I was at a conference. I was actually recording a podcast with my phone in a lobby of the hotel, and I was asked a similar question about why I do what I do. And it's really, thinking about where they're going to be in 10, 12 years, making sure that those opportunities are still there in a meaningful way. So much opportunity for innovation and change, and it's always exciting to be a part of that.
Yeah, and I feel like I might be speaking for you, but your history tells the truth, and that's a lot of people are moving into edtech now, right? But you made the shift 10 plus years ago. Is that correct?
Yeah. And that was good opportunity to dive from I worked at a small college in Connecticut in admissions and enrollment management, did some marketing work, and then jumped into college search and selection work and student marketing, demand gen, all of those things.
Right, and you've been in edtech for 10 plus years, multiple different working with different organizations, so you've had the opportunity to switch industries, but you've stayed with us in higher ed, and so
yep,
I think
absolutely.
That speaks truth. That's great. And so, I really love today's topic. I think it might be one of the first times I'm covering it at this level. And it's going to be all around student persistence and why you should be talking about student persistence. And before we jump in, I'd love for you to, explain your thought and idea on what is student persistence. How does it relate to student retention, and how is it different?
Yeah, thanks for that setup there. I think, one of the things that is a challenge for a lot of folks, and especially candidly the audience for your podcast, is we're always focused on generating demand for the institution. And that's not to say we shouldn't, right? We do need to focus on generating demand for the institution. But when we think about all of the factors that are at play right now impacting student success and impacting the health of our institutions, everything now points to, we can't just get students there, we have to keep them there, and we have to help them to be successful, right? And so when we use the words, many people will use the word persistence and they'll use the word retention kind of interchangeably, but there are some subtle differences and meaningful differences when it comes to that type of vernacular, right? Retention in a lot of ways is our word as administrators, right? It's our term for, we want to put our effort into making sure that students stay at the institution, right? And that's, we have processes in place tracking likelihood of a student to drop out. We have predictive models to help with identifying students when they're entering, who's most at risk. But persistence is really the student's desire to move forward towards their degree, right? And the level of a student's desire to persist can oftentimes be impacted by a number of factors, but realistically, there's kind of finite buckets that these factors fall into, and we'll talk about this as we go today, I think. But I think generally speaking, whether it's research from Dr. Vincent Tinto or the Gates Foundation or any any educational research think tank, it all kind of boils down to key factors like financial distress, mental wellness, and academic engagement, overall campus involvement. Those are the types of things that are impacting students' desire to persist, right? So if they're finding themselves facing challenges in one of those key areas, then that impacts the student's ability to then move forward and decide to continue towards their degree. We all know that, for most students, it's better to complete the degree than to not, right? There's only so many Bill Gateses out there in the world that, or Mark Zuckerbergs or whatever, where you can point to an education dropout and say, oh, they were successful. So once they start, it's better for them to finish, right? And so, the persistence really, it turns into that student's ability and desire to move forward and complete their degree.
Got it. And, the way when you first told me about this, the way I thought of it is that it's a simple language change that puts the emphasis on the actual problem versus from looking at it from an institutional or a business perspective. Is that right?
Yeah,
Is that kind of a good way to look at it? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's putting the student's perspective first than our own perspective, right? We're measuring retention rates as a measure of success because it's our ability to keep students at the institution, but the true metric and the true valuable outcome is that student actually progressing towards a degree and finishing their degree, right? Because then, big picture pie in the sky, then the student is more likely to be a successful alum who then is advocating on behalf of the institution, in a better position to contribute to the alumni fund and donate. So it's that full life cycle element of all of this, where just because we're able to keep a student there, but they're not actually moving forward to their degree, they're bouncing around, changing majors, they're going into more debt. There's all these different challenges that retention alone doesn't solve for, right? And so persistence and measuring of student persistence is a key item that we really need to focus on.
Absolutely. Got it. Thanks for that clarification. And I think you kind of set the picture already for this, but, when we think about our audience for this podcast and we think about higher ed marketing, why should this topic be talked about more? And, why does it matter to the institution?
I think the best way to look at this is I'm going to come to our side, the dirty vendor side of the desk for a moment, and think about when our sales teams are talking to prospective customers, what does every single salesperson get asked about? It's case studies and it's testimonials, right? Oh, well, did this work for other people? Was it successful? Whether you're looking at a virtual tour or you're looking at a finance processing software, it doesn't matter, right? You always want to know, did this work for someone else? So the more successful students that we create, the more success stories that we have to share, right? And so it becomes a marketing problem when we have more failures than successes, and we do, right? There is a college completion crisis in this country right now. 6,000 students are dropping out every single day, right? And so there's a challenge that needs to be addressed as part of this process. And you think about it, I joke about this, with my two kids and everything else. I think about the old nursery rhyme song, there's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, right? And at the end of the day, how do you fix the hole? It brings you to Google it so you get the full thing, because I'm going to abridge it for podcasting purposes. And I'm also not going to sing a nursery song on your podcast. Sorry. But the end of the day, Henry is told to go get water to help with fixing the bucket, but he can't get water because there's a hole in the bucket, right? And so we can't keep going, especially with diminishing demographics and the constant discussion about the value of education and students given other opportunities and options, and there are other options and opportunities. We can't keep filling our bucket when there's a hole that everything is dripping out of, right? And so focusing on persistence and retention ensures that we are working towards a world where student success is at the forefront, and that gives us more success stories to talk about, more success metrics to tout in our outcomes, and not just going out and pounding the pavement to try to recruit more students at every high school and college fair in the country.
Got it. And so I'm taking your vendor lens here, and you're pretty much saying, it's a better investment in ROI, right? As well, on top of increasing the student retention number.
Yeah.
So you develop those stories in the future, but in the near term, in the immediate impact is you're getting more bang for your buck. Is that right?
And the other thing to look at too is, we know it's, everyone always says, and there's data and there's research to substantiate it, that it costs less to retain a customer than to go out and get a new customer, right? And if we, and I know a lot of people in higher ed don't like to consider their college to be a business, but the business of the institution is tuition revenue for many schools. And it's more cost effective to keep your current students than to continually go out and recruit more and more and more of them, especially when that number keeps shrinking, right? And so it's the yield conversation of a recruitment cycle just one step further, right? If more institutions invested, let's say 10% of what they put into list acquisition and travel into yield focused efforts, that would pay huge dividends, and they wouldn't have to get as many names from College Board or ACT or whatever to get to the bottom, that number that they need from an enrollment perspective. If they shifted 10% of their enrollment, effort into retention and persistence support, then they're going to, and lifted, let's say, I've seen schools that we work with that see as high as 14% lift in student retention. That's a meaningful number from a net tuition revenue perspective, where you can't look away from that. And so, it's not as shiny and pretty as being able to tout record breaking applications every year and that sort of stuff. But those are vanity metrics, right? We need to look at the numbers that matter, and the numbers that matter are how many students are finding success at our institution, not how many are enrolling every fall.
Got it. And, what did you say? 6,000 students are dropping out every day. Like, how did we get here? Like, it seems like a no-brainer to plug that hole in the bucket, but, are there some things that have prevented a focus on student persistence and student success in the past? What are you seeing as some of the blockers, or what do you think are?
This is where my 10 plus years of ed tech plus 10 years working in the admissions side before that will come through, because I'm gonna spit some hot fire of truth a little bit during in response to that question. I think the reality is that it's easier from an effort perspective to hire a consulting firm or to go out and buy big lists of names and just keep pouring things into the top of the funnel than it is to truly address the issues at the middle and the bottom of the funnel to fix those yield and retention and persistence challenges, right? So number one, it's easier to say, because you always get, and everybody jokes about it, but oh yeah, we have the board member that came up with a great idea for us to visit high schools in our market, right? and we brush that off as a joke because it's, we've been doing that for years. And this is not to say don't visit high schools in your local market. You should, right? Access, opportunity, owning your backyard. Clearly, you do all those things. But visiting every school twice, or going to every single college fair in the state of New Jersey when there's 12 every night, right? There are certain things that we can reevaluate, but it's a lot easier to throw an admissions counselor in a car and say, go pick up some cards at the college fair, than it is to think strategically and listen to the student perspective and incorporate that into the work that we're doing. And that's not to say people don't and they're not trying to, but we're not operationalized to think that way, right? We're operationalized to recruit, not retain and drive persistence. Right. Even, I know a lot of admissions people, or a lot of people with titles of vice president of enrollment management who are essentially directors of admission. They're not truly focusing on enrollment, because when you ask them, you say, okay, who oversees retention on your team? Oh, well, that's actually in this division. I would assume with a title like enrollment management, enrollment being the key word, focusing on the students who are enrolled in the institution should be part of your job description. But it's oftentimes it's a side of the desk project for people, or it's an afterthought. And when it becomes a side of the desk project or an afterthought, it is not what really drives that person's motivation, right? They're being judged by number of applications, because that impacts your acceptance rate, which is a metric that you report to the U.S. News, right? Number of admitted students from different states. That's a metric that you want to be able to tout to the board, right? There's all these different competing factors. So persistence becomes an afterthought.
Got it. No, I appreciate the candid answer as well. And I think it needs to be said. So that's good. I think we mentioned also, like, do you think that a shift in titles or having dedicated titles will help alleviate it being just like low on the totem pole of, the responsibilities for someone in enrollment management? Like maybe like, director of student persistence. Like, do you think that would help? Like, what are the changes do you see that need to be made?
I think a change of titles and true bullets and job descriptions are a piece of the puzzle, right? Then you have to live into it. So we can change the title all we want, but we also have to resource around that, right? And there are a lot of, systems and processes that many institutions will invest in, predictive. Either they do it in-house with IR department, or they work with an outside vendor for things like predictive models, right? Or, tracking software to identify. And there are so many different tools out there. I know schools that are using everything from classroom attendance to meal card swipes to, every interaction is being tracked from the minute they enroll at the institution. But a lot of times those types of things, they end up too late in the process, right? I think there's lagging indicators when it comes to those sorts of things. Think about, I'll just give one quick example, right? You're a faculty member at an institution, and 6 weeks into the semester, you realize that I'm not showing up to class. I haven't shown up to class in 3 weeks, right? So then you log into system du jour of the campus, whatever system that they're using, and say, Gil Rogers is at risk because I haven't seen him in 6 weeks. Well, that's been 6 weeks since I haven't been in class. I've probably already decided I'm not going to continue next semester, and I'm already far gone at that point, right? And so we have to think more proactively and be more, open to, again, I mentioned before, the student voice and the student perspective of all of this, and be reaching out to students directly earlier in the process. So title changes are nice, process changes are better, right? And I think thinking about and again, not to say that those tracking programs are inherently bad, but there was recently I saw an Education Dive and Inside Higher Ed and a couple other different places. There's data that show that there's some bias in those systems, especially predictive models that are using, and we have research that shows there's issues with a lot of the dated methods of data that are being used, or especially post-COVID with standardized test scores used to be a key component of those types of measures. Well, now when so many students in schools are test optional, and even the students who are taking them under heavy stress and isolation and mental health and lack of preparation. So is it really a good indicator at that point, right? And so again, good maybe baseline starting point, but you can't use that as your only metric for engaging with students. You have to use your interactions with students as the true driving force in having those conversations.
Got it. And I'm curious, with some of the customers that maybe you've worked with and helped increase that student persistence rate or student retention rate, like how do you get buy-in for it from your school if, like you were saying, fundamentally that a lot at the institutional level, those weren't metrics that they reported on? Like how have you seen, and maybe an example here will help like an institution turn that around?
Yeah, I'll use an example of a partner that I know will be happy to get a shout out, right? You've got, schools like Jacksonville University in Florida who are really leveraging their campus community and campus personality in creative ways, right? So one of the things that we specifically do at EdSights is we developed a framework for reaching out to students in a proactive way using AI and text messaging to kind of fill the gaps that people have, right? And so while you might have a predictive model that says, hey, this bucket of students coming in is at risk, that's not perfect. It's not ideal, and it's static, right? That model score is based off of your regression analysis. It's based off of your incoming data points, and then it doesn't change, right? So there's going to be students that become more at risk because of the key drivers impacting persistence that wasn't accounted for in that model. Same on the other side with these tracking systems where, you track someone 6 weeks after, but what was happening during those first 4, 5, 6 weeks before that, right? And so what we do is we proactively reach out to students with an AI chatbot via text message. So it's different than when people say chatbots, a lot of times they think, the little widget on the side of the website answering questions. Mm-hmm. That knowledge base can be used for those sorts of purposes, but the true benefit is saying, we're going to reach out to these students on a weekly basis, and we're going to ask them, how are you doing? Temperature checks, wellness checks, just, how are classes going? How, you've been in for the first, week. How are things going? Are you running into any issues? And for students who say that they're stressed, or students who say, and it's a quick one number response, 1, 2, 3, how am I feeling? Good, bad, terrible, right? And so for the students who don't reply positively, then they're they're identified, and they're automatically then connected to resources based on what they say is stressing them out or keeping them from being successful. Right. And then they're also flagged ahead of any of those other lagging systems would have flagged those students. So I mentioned Jacksonville University. What they do is their bot takes on the moniker of Nellie, which is their mascot of their institution. It's a dolphin, right? Nellie the dolphin sends a text message to the community, and it's a combination of those proactive check-ins, reactive responses to students when they're asking questions. And it's not just the operational, hey, how are you feeling? There's also, community development elements that come along with that, right? So it's an extension of the team, not a component that's just there as a standalone responsive tool, right? And so little things like emoji karaoke, or creating a Spotify playlist based off of feedback from the campus community. There's some fun elements to all of this too, right? And so then what clients then get to see, and what Jacksonville University gets to see, and all of our other partners, is immediate insight into the student voice and the student perspective, clear next steps for the students who need to be connected with, and the positive elements too, like what students are doing well, and then kind of can replicate those experiences. And so depending on how many tags the school is using, and when I say tag, it's what kind of profile data am I putting into the system, and then able to segment by, right? First generation, resident versus commuter, and first year student, second year student, athlete, non-athlete, there's the sky is the limit as far as how you can segment that data. But it's taking advantage of that opportunity to say, let's look at the data early and often versus waiting until it's too late. And so for the schools that find success are the ones that see that as again the the gap filler between the people and the technology that they already have, and are able to use that to be more direct in their approach. And I know that was a very long answer, but I want to share one story that came up today during our company all hands. We had one of our partner success managers who was sharing a story about one of the schools that we work with. They were doing some insights on their data, and they found that there was a student who had indicated that they were struggling with academic engagement, and then they went into that student's kind of free-form responses of the whys, right? So there's the machine learning element of this that identifies the students and connects them to resources, but then there's also the human eyes on these responses. And what came out of the free-form response was that student was actually struggling with homelessness. She was sleeping in her car, and that was keeping her from being able to be engaged academically because she was running into these issues. And the team at the institution was able to then connect with that student, connect her with resources, get her a place to stay, and then that takes that student to that and is able to that's a persistence issue addressed at that moment, right? Is now that student is able to now have to focus on, okay, where am I going to sleep tonight? Right. And they get to focus on their academics and their work, right? And that was everyone, half our team was on webcam, people are in tears, right? It's like that's the why we do what we do, is that specific reason that came up during those examples. And that's not an out of the ordinary example, unfortunately, right? Like there are all those issues are coming and are a big part of the why 6,000 students are dropping out every day. They're not dropping out because they don't want a higher education. They're dropping out because there are these outside factors that are impacting them. And what we do is help to identify what those issues are and connect the students to the resources that they need. So hopefully that helps answer that question.
No, that's an amazing story. And if you were to look at a lot of the traditional indicators in place today, like that are often too late, like we might have dropped the ball on that one, right? Because maybe that person would never proactively on their own reached out with their issue because
correct. Yep.
It's it's hard, right? It's a issue that maybe most people don't want to talk about. And so without that proactiveness, it might have been an issue that would have never been solved.
Yeah. She would have gotten through that semester and not registered for the next semester and not responded to any phone calls from the academic advisor or the admissions person, whoever was asked to call the list of students who aren't registered for next semester, which every school does.
It's too late.
It would have not come back, right? And chances are, you brought up a good point that it's hard to bring up that type of a challenge with another human, right? To say that, to find someone and say, I'm sleeping in my car, I need help, is something that a lot of people are just, because of pride, because of confusion, because of just not knowing who to go to. But to respond to and this is where the generation gaps sometimes come into play on perception of these things. For students these days to respond with a completely honest and open response like that to a robot is second nature to them, right? And they do it because it's comfortable. It's got that sense of anonymity, anonymousness, however you want to pronounce that word. It brings in that comfort that they can't get by having to physically go to an office and ask someone for help. They're not going to do that part. They're going to text message back why they're in trouble, and then it's up to the staff to connect to them directly.
Right. Oh, that's great. And, I have taken one step back, whether your institution is currently ready to adopt a tool like EdSights or not, like what are some other things that, institutions can be doing on their own to be more proactive, to not just use the old school indicators? Like what are some of the things that they can be doing?
Yeah, I think generally you hit the nail on the head as being more proactive and putting the student voice into their work, right? I think there's so much assumption and guesswork that goes into the work of supporting students. So having some type of a process for collecting student perspectives is important, right? Then the challenge is, again, generational gaps on some of these things, is doing it in a way where you're actually getting useful data. I think a lot of people's solution is, oh, we'll send a survey. It's like, okay, well, we have a 25 question survey with 30 30 options in each one because it's something, oh, we want all these answers. Well, it's no different than on the admissions office side when they have an RFI form with 30 fields and they wonder why there's no conversions, right? It's really, you have to think about the way it's better to ask one question a week and get a good answer than to ask 20 questions once
right.
and get no responses, right?
Could it also be like thinking about what questions the school wants to ask versus like what answers the students actually want to answer as well, right? Like, because a question is, you can always format a question to play your own cards, right? And so maybe it even boils down to just the questions you're asking might not be right.
Yeah, and that goes back to the Nelly at Jacksonville University example, right? I think one of the reasons why students are so open when it's a branded bot, like a mascot branded bot example, is in addition to the proactive nudges of hey, how are things going, there's those personality elements that come to it, right? The introductory text message that students get from Nelly is a link to a video of the live dolphin mascot from the institution performing at an event. And it's like, let me introduce myself, I'm Nelly, right? So there's automatically this like lower level of effort on behalf of the student, and there's that you're just breaking the barriers down of being able to connect because it's so casual, right? Versus, please take this survey from the Office of Student Affairs because it will help us to better support you. Like there's just different ways that these things land. Right. Students don't want to help you do your job better. They want to get the resources that they need to be successful. Same thing, really, if we think about it, but they don't care about making your job easier. They care about getting the resources that they need to be successful. And so you got to make it about them and make it about their experience and their perspectives. And by having that outreach be personalized and be a little bit more casual is going to land with much better results. I mean, that's what we see, 77, 80% in active engagement with bots, right? 97, 98% opt-in rates, right? Like it's not a challenge getting students to engage with a bot via text message. The challenge is getting the community to act on it in an appropriate way, right? And so but you're not gonna get the campus to work well with a 20 question survey with no meaningful responses, right? It's got to be nuggeted the other way too.
Got it. No, thanks for explaining that. I have one last question, and I'm taking another step back, and I'm wondering, like, let's say I'm, a mid-level management in enrollment management, right? Mm-hmm. And I know student persistence and student success is an issue, but I need to get buy-in, to invest in it, whether it's tools like EdSights or just, to put more money towards a program and in investing in student success and student persistence. Like, have you worked with institutions and like stakeholders that have successfully worked upwards, or maybe it's downwards or across, that have, gotten the institution to invest more in their program?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways to go about doing that, right? And one is always my favorite higher ed response to any of these types of things is, well, if I can show that I can get one student to stay, that'll pay for the whole thing, right? Because realistically, that's true, right? From a financial dollars to dollars perspective, that's true. Now, with all that said, we all know that there's more than that, because that still ultimately comes with stopping doing something else because there's no money tree in the backyard of any campus, right? So we have to stop doing some things before we can start doing other things. And so it's really thinking about, okay, what are the things that we're investing resources in that we can't track, can't measure, are seeing no ROI on, and those are the things we have to step away from. And I'll say that you identify one or two of those small things and then combine those financial resources together, you can shift that very easily to a campaign with EdSights and how that could work together, right? The other, I think, is to really again kind of think about it from a team kind of support and enhancement perspective. There are, countless articles now about quiet quitting and about, the challenges of, there are surveys of people working at colleges and universities saying they're actively looking for other jobs because of work-life balance and because there's other things. So, and I'm not saying to lay off a staff member to pay for an initiative. I think that
Right.
is a short-sighted type of perspective. But I will say, invest the value of a person into a good plan, and now you've got resources. And there's so many postings out there for positions in these different areas that the resources are there. It's about putting it in the right place. And when you don't have a deep pool of resumes to fill these open positions, you got to do something to support these students, right? And investing in the resources to do that's another angle to go about it with.
Got it. No, I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Great. Well, it's been awesome talking to you. We covered a lot about student persistence, and it's been really insightful. Like you said, a little bit different from the creating demand aspect, which is why I really liked having you on as a guest. I was wondering where our audience could reconnect with you and find out more about you, maybe your organization as well.
Sure. So our website is edsights.io. So you can find all of our research, subscribe to our newsletter. We have a weekly newsletter with great insights that's published. You can find me on the LinkedIn machine where I have my super active bio. I just added my job as a 8U hockey coach and got lots of great play there. But find me on LinkedIn. I still have a page on Twitter at Gil Rogers. Haven't been very active there as of late, but you can feel free to follow me and send me messages, and I can connect there as well. Or easiest to remember email address in the world of higher education, Gil, Gil, at edsights.io.
Thanks so much, Gil. It was great having you on.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Great. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in and watching the recording or listening to the recording. And please join us on the next one. And of course, if you need a virtual tour, interactive map, or events calendar solution, please reach out to us. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.